Nobody pins a medal on the man who just keeps showing up. There's no card for it at the Shoppers, no Sunday in the calendar. You just get up before the sun, start the truck to let it warm, scrape the windshield, and choose it again without anybody clapping. I did that for 17 years. And the girl I did it for stood in our front hall on the morning she got married and told me the kindest thing I could do was stay away. My name is Malcolm Ostrander. I'm 63 years old, and I spent 31 of those years climbing hydro poles for a living out of Renfrew, Ontario, up and down the valley, out along the 17 when the ice took the lines down and half the county went dark. I've hung off a bucket at -30 with my eyelashes freezing, while somebody's furnace died 2 concessions over. I don't own a suit that fit me right. But for 17 years I got up for a girl who never once asked me to, and on the day she stood up in front of God and the whole town in a white dress, she told me I wasn't family enough to watch. Stick with me on this one, folks. It goes somewhere I didn't expect it to go, and there's a kitchen table at the end of it you'll want to see. Tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you've ever been the one who stayed, hit that like and subscribe. You're among your own kind here. I met her mother at the curling club in the winter of 2007. I wasn't even supposed to be there. A buddy talked me into filling in as lead on a Thursday night league because somebody's knee went, and I was terrible. I mean, genuinely a hazard on the ice, and this woman 2 sheets over was laughing at me. Not mean. Just laughing. The way you laugh when somebody's trying so hard and failing so honestly that it does you good to watch. Afterward, we ended up at the same table over lukewarm coffee from one of those big steel urns, and she stuck out her hand and said her name was Faye. Something about the way she laughed made me feel like I'd been standing out in the cold for years, and somebody had finally opened a door and told me to come sit by the stove. She told me about the girl on our 3rd time out. We were at a diner on Raglan Street, the one that's a nail place now, and she set her mug down real careful, like it might go off. "I've got a daughter," she said. "She's 7. Her name's Nora. Her dad, her actual dad, his name's Curtis. Curtis and I have been finished a long time, but he drifts back through when it suits him." I said, "Okay. No, I need you to hear what that means before you decide anything," she said. "It means I come with a kid, and I come with a man who's going to keep turning up like a bad penny, and I've watched grown men hear that and remember somewhere they had to be." I told her it meant she had a daughter, and I'd heard her the first time. She looked at me a long while, longer than was comfortable. "Most fellas are already reaching for their coat," she said. I wasn't. I stayed in that booth, and I kept staying more or less for the next 17 years. Nora was a little slip of a thing when I first met her, small for 7, quiet in the way that puts you on edge, with her mother's gray eyes and a chin that I would later learn came straight off her father. Faye brought me by the house one Sunday, and the girl shook my hand like a bank manager, looked me dead in the eye, and then went straight back down the hall to her room without one more word. Smart, I thought. She's already sorted out that most men who come through that door are just passing through, and she's not going to waste her good manners on somebody who won't be here at Christmas. I decided standing right there in that hallway that I was going to be the one who was. I didn't say it out loud. You don't say a thing like that to a 7-year-old. You just start proving it and let her keep score. I married her mother in the spring of 2008, out at the little United Church on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, egg salad sandwiches and a sheet cake in the church basement after. Nora was 8. She wore a dress the color of a robin's egg and refused to smile for a single photograph, and I'll tell you the truth, I respected the daylights out of her for it. She wasn't going to fake anything for anybody. Most grown adults spend their whole lives faking. This kid was 8 years old and already wouldn't do it. There's a picture from that day, Faye and me grinning like fools, and this little girl in the blue dress staring straight into the camera like she was memorizing the exits. The first couple of years, I'd call it an armed truce. I didn't push. I didn't come home with an armful of presents and a big goofy grin like some men do, like they're auditioning for a Bell commercial, hoping the kid will run into their arms. I just lived in the house. I did my share. I fixed the porch step and shoveled the walk and let the girl watch me from the window and figure out on her own time whether I was going to bolt. Her mother worked at the pharmacy, evenings mostly, so it fell to me to run Nora to her figure skating. 6 in the morning, 3 days a week, that cold that gets into the metal of the truck so the door handle bites your hand. I'd have her at the arena in Arnprior, with her skates and a box of Timbits between us on the bench seat, and she wouldn't say 2 words the whole way there. I'm a valley man and I worked 30 years mostly alone up a pole in the middle of nowhere. I am extremely comfortable with quiet. So I just drove and I let the radio play low and I didn't make her talk. One morning she must have been about 10, black as pitch out, freezing rain ticking on the windshield, and out of nowhere she said, "You don't have to wait inside. It's boring. You can sit in the truck." I told her I didn't mind the cold. She was quiet a minute, then she said, "Coach says you're always here." She said she's never seen you miss. I said the coach ought to mind her own drills. Nora almost smiled. Almost. And she said, "You can watch if you want. I don't care." That was the most generous thing that girl had said to me in 3 years, and I have carried it around in my chest, ever since like a stone worn smooth. Out loud all I said was, "All right." But I'm telling you, I stood at the boards that morning in the cold of that arena and watched a 10-year-old land a jump she'd been fighting for a month, and something moved in me that I still don't have a proper word for. The closest I can get is pride, or whatever version of it a man's allowed to feel about a child that isn't his by blood. Here's the part I didn't understand for a long time. While I was building something with that girl, one frozen morning at a time, one shoveled walk at a time, her mother was quietly taking the foundation out from under me. And I want to be careful how I say this, because it would be easy to make Faye the villain. And this story is a harder thing to hold once you understand she wasn't one. My wife wasn't cruel. My wife was scared half to death, and scared people do damage in slow motion. They do it so gently you can hardly see it happening. Sometimes they can't even see it themselves. You have to understand what happened to Faye before I ever came along. Curtis walked out when Nora was 5. Packed a duffel bag on a Tuesday, said he needed room to breathe, and by the fall he was living down in Oshawa with somebody new. And before Curtis there'd been a fella named Dale, back when she was younger, who she thought she was going to marry right up until the week he stopped answering the phone. 2 men who looked like forever, and turned out to be weather. By the time I came along, my wife had built a callus over the whole thing, and that callus had a rule stamped into it. Don't let the girl get attached to a man who's only going to leave. So when I turned up, steady, boring, dependable the way a diesel engine is dependable, she watched me with hope in one hand and a stopwatch in the other. She wanted me to stay. She just didn't believe I would. And she was not, under any circumstances, going to let her daughter fall for another man who'd pack a bag. So she started protecting the girl. Quietly, gently. The way only a mother who's already been left knows how to do. When Nora was 9 and starting to thaw toward me just at the edges, Faye would say little things. Never big things, little seeds. "Malcolm works so hard, sweetheart, those long stretches away. You know how it is with the hydro. They can be gone a week when the lines go down. You can't plan your life around a man who's never home." When Nora was 12 and I hadn't missed a single competition, her mother would say, "He's a good man, Nora. I just don't want you counting on things too much. People change. Situations change. Just keep a little bit of yourself back is all I'm saying." When Nora was 15 and I heard her nearly call me dad by accident one night at supper, and then go red to the ears and stare at her plate, Faye pulled her aside afterward. I don't know what got said, but it never came close to happening again. She wasn't trying to wound me. I believe that to this day, believe it with my whole chest. She was trying to save her daughter from the one specific kind of heartbreak she knew best, the kind where you love a man, and then one Tuesday he's gone. And the terrible joke of it, the thing that still gets me if I sit too long with it, is that I was the one man in that girl's life who was never, not ever, going to leave. I was the permanent one, and she raised her to treat me like the weather. Nora grew up thinking her distance from me was good sense, street smarts, keeping herself safe. She had no idea she was living inside her mother's old fear, wearing it like a hand-me-down coat that didn't even fit her. And I kept driving to the arena. I kept signing the permission forms. I kept climbing the poles. Now I have to tell you about the big storm, because if you're from around here, you already know which one I mean. The derecho. May of 2022 came out of nowhere on a Saturday afternoon, flattened trees from Kitchener clear across to Ottawa and down the valley. We lost people that day. I was out for 11 days straight after that, sleeping 4 hours a night in a motel in Carleton Place with 6 other fellas, working the lines in country I'd known my whole life and couldn't hardly recognize with the trees down across it. I missed Nora's grade 12 awards night for that storm. She got an academic medal and I wasn't there, and I remember standing in a farmer's field at 10 o'clock at night with a broken pole in front of me, eating a cold roast beef sandwich out of a Ziploc bag, thinking she'll understand, and knowing at the same time that her mother would make sure she understood it, as one more example of a man you couldn't count on. I kept the medal, though. Faye had set it on the counter. When I got home 11 days later, I found it there, and I put it in my toolbox in the garage, and it's still there, up in the top tray with the fuses, and I don't fully know why, except that somebody in that house ought to have thought it was worth keeping. Let me tell you about my buddy Gus, because you'll need him for the end of this. Gus and I go back to grade 9 at Renfrew Collegiate. We played hockey together, terrible hockey, and we both went into the trades, and Gus ended up buying the hardware store on Raglan Street off old man who retired, and then he bought the building next to it too. A narrow brick storefront that had been a shoe repair and then a vape shop, and then just sat empty with brown paper in the windows. Gus is the kind of friend you can phone at 11 at night, and he doesn't get short with you about the hour. That kind's rarer than people let on. Now Nora, she could bake. She got it from her grandmother, Faye's mother, a woman named Vera, who I only knew for a few years before she passed, but who could make a butter tart that would bring a grown man to tears. Vera taught that girl at the elbow from the time she could stand on a chair. And by the time Nora was through school, she wasn't talking about being a lawyer or a nurse or any of that. She wanted her own bake shop. She had a scrapbook, had it since she was 14, full of pictures torn out of magazines and things she'd drawn herself. And there was a name on the sign in every single sketch. Vera's. She was going to call it after her grandmother. She'd even drawn the delivery van, a little panel van the exact robin's egg blue of the dress she wore to my wedding, with Vera's lettered on the side in gold. She used to leave that scrapbook out on the kitchen table, and then, when she noticed me looking at it, she'd close it and take it up to her room. Like wanting something that bad was a soft spot she couldn't afford to let me see. When she was 21, I started talking to Gus. Not asking, just talking. Gus had that empty storefront next to the hardware, best location on the street, right across from the LCBO where everybody parks. And I said, offhand, one night over a couple of beers in his garage, that if he ever thought about what to do with that spot, my girl could bake, really bake, and she'd always wanted her own place. Gus looked at me a long minute and said, "How much you thinking about doing for her?" I said, "Whatever it takes. Somebody ought to." He nodded slow, and he said, "That storefront's not going anywhere. You get her ready, we'll figure the rest." Over the next 3 years, Gus turned down 2 other tenants for that space. A phone shop and some fella who wanted to put in a tanning salon. Held it empty, paying the taxes on it himself, for the better part of 3 years. When I finally asked him straight out why he'd do that, he said, "Because you spent 30 years climbing poles for this town, and you've never once asked me for a thing. Least I can do is hold a room for your kid." I didn't correct him on the word kid. I wanted to. "She's not really mine," I almost said. I didn't. I did more than that, and I need you to understand what it cost, because I'm not a man with deep pockets. A lineman's pension is decent, but it isn't a lottery ticket. I took the buyout of overtime I'd banked, and I cashed a GIC I'd been rolling over since before the girl was born, and I quietly paid off her OSAP loans from culinary school, every last dollar, so she'd start clean. And then I found a used panel van up in Pembroke, an old bread truck, and I paid a fella in Cobden to paint it robin's egg blue and letter Vera's down the side in gold, exactly the way she'd drawn it when she was 14, and I kept it out at Gus's place under a tarp where she'd never see it. I put the whole works into one long envelope. The lease Gus had drawn up with a year's rent already covered. The letter saying her loans were cleared. The key to the van on a plain ring because Nora had always said she hated a cluttered keychain, which is the kind of thing you remember about a person when you've been paying attention for 17 years. I kept that envelope in the inside pocket of my good coat, the one I only wore to funerals. I told nobody, not even my wife. Now, Curtis. I told you he drifted back through when it suited him. Well, that spring, the spring Nora got engaged to a good young paramedic named Devon, Curtis drifted back in a way he never had before. Nora was 24 and getting married in June, and all of a sudden her father, who'd sent a card maybe every 3rd birthday for 2 decades, was around, taking her for lunch in Ottawa, buying her things I couldn't. Charming, the way that man has always been charming, could sell a screen door to a submarine. And I watched him work on her, slow, over those few months. I heard about it secondhand, and then I started to see it in her. Little things. She got cooler with me again, after years of us finally warming up. She'd flinch a bit when I called her kiddo. And one night, I overheard the tail end of something on the phone, her saying to somebody, probably him, "Yeah, no, I know he's not really my dad. He just married mom. He just married mom." 17 years, and that's what it had gotten distilled down to in her mind, with her mother's old fear underneath doing half the work and her father's silver tongue on top doing the rest. He offered to walk her down the aisle, and she said yes, and nobody thought to mention any of it to me until it was already decided. The wedding was set for a Saturday in the middle of June, out at a barn venue near Douglas that's all done up for that kind of thing now. String lights and hay bales for the city people. Beautiful. Curtis had flown in, staying at the good hotel in Ottawa, taking everybody to dinner, being photographed being a proud father. And Nora was lit up like a hydro line all week, glowing on her phone, checking his flight, the way a person glows when their favorite is coming to town. I was very clearly not the favorite. That was all right. I'd made my peace with that a long time before. The morning of the wedding, I was in the kitchen tidying up, straightening chairs that didn't need straightening, wiping a counter that was already clean, just staying useful the way I always had. My good coat was hanging by the back door, with the envelope in the pocket. I was going to give it to her at the reception, quiet, off to the side once the speeches were done. I heard her come down the stairs behind me, already in her dress, that white doing something to the light in the whole room, and I turned around smiling, ready to tell her she looked like her grandmother. "Malcolm," she said. My own name, said the way you say a word you've worn out. Flat, careful, rehearsed. I set down the dish rag. "I need to say something before we go," she said, "and I need you to not make it a whole thing." She took a breath. "The best gift you could give me today is to not come. Dad's walking me down the aisle. It should just be him. You understand, you're not my real father. You're just Malcolm." The kitchen went dead quiet. The furnace fan clicked off and you could hear the clock over the stove. "You've been good to us," she said, softer, like she was doing me a favor with the softness. "But today's about family." Then she straightened the skirt of that dress and went back up the stairs to finish getting ready. I stood there, just Malcolm. I didn't move for a good while. And then, because I guess the day figured I hadn't taken quite enough on the chin, I looked up. My wife was standing at the end of the hall. She'd heard the whole thing. I could see it in her, in how still she'd gone, in the way she was looking at me with something that wasn't quite shame, and wasn't quite sorry, and wasn't anywhere near brave enough to be either one. Our eyes met. 1 second. 2. And then she turned and went up the stairs, after her daughter, and she didn't make a sound. That was the moment I understood the whole thing. Not the girl's words. I'd been half-braced for the girl's words since the day I married her mother. Kids raised inside of fear say hard things, and they don't even always know it isn't theirs. That wasn't the wound. The wound was my wife in that hallway, choosing quiet one more time the way she'd chosen it for 17 years. All those little seeds, all those keep a bit of yourself back. She'd built the very distance that was now standing in front of me in a wedding dress, and she stood in that hall with a front row seat to her own handiwork and said not one word. I walked over to my good coat, and I took the envelope out of the pocket. I set it on the kitchen table. I laid the van key on top of it, the plain silver ring, no clutter, the way she liked. Then I took out the other letter, the one I'd written to my wife a week before and gone back and forth on whether I'd ever have the nerve to leave, and I set it beside the envelope, open, face up, so there'd be no mystery about it. I put my coat on. I did not slam the door. I've never been a door slammer. I pulled it shut behind me soft, like a man who's finally set something heavy down, and I got in my truck and I drove. I didn't leave town. I drove out to the boat launch on the Bonachere, where I used to go when the house felt too small for whatever I was hauling around inside me. Cut the engine, rolled the window down. Sat there in the June evening with the river going by and the black flies finding me, and I let them. I wasn't running. I just needed somewhere quiet to put my head down for a while, the way you do. If you've stuck with me this far, do me the one small thing and hit that subscribe button. Most folks watch the whole way through and never do it. And it doesn't cost you a nickel, but it means the world to an old fella telling his story into a camera. Give it a like while you're there. All right. Here's where it turns. While I sat by the river, they went and got married. The girl came down the aisle on her father's arm, and there were speeches and there was dancing under the string lights, and Curtis, I'm told, gave a toast about how proud he was, about being there for his little girl, and nobody at that barn knew any different. They came home late, well past midnight, Faye and Nora and the new husband, and I understand there was still laughing coming up the walk about something Curtis had said. They came into the kitchen. The light was on over the table. I'd left it on. And there was the envelope, and the key, and the two letters, and the particular emptiness of a house that's missing the one person who's supposed to be standing in it. Nora picked up her envelope first. Inside was the lease, with Gus's careful handwriting, the storefront on Raglan Street, a full year's rent already paid, held empty and waiting for the better part of 3 years. The letter saying her school loans were cleared, all of them gone. And underneath, in my own chicken scratch, one line I'd added at the kitchen table before I left. The van's out at Gus's under the blue tarp. It's yours, and so's the room on Raglan, whether I'm at the wedding or not. Vera would have been proud of you. Drive safe. Malcolm, that was all. No, after everything I've done. No bill for the overtime, the 6 a.m. arena runs, the loans, the years. Nothing she could ever throw back at me later and call guilt or a performance. Just the thing itself, handed over clean, and a door held open behind me on my way out of it. The husband, Devon, found out about the van and drove out to Gus's that same night, near 2 in the morning, and pulled the tarp off it in the dark, and phoned back to say it was real. Robin's egg blue with her grandmother's name in gold down the side, exactly the way she'd drawn it when she was 14. Nora stood in the kitchen and did not say a word. Her mother's letter was a different thing. Faye read hers standing at the counter, and she read it 4 times before her legs would carry her to a chair. I know that because she told me, months later, once enough had come apart between them, that the truth finally had room to breathe. It said, and I'll give you the shape of it, that I'd known for a long time she was afraid I'd leave, and that I understood why, that she'd been left before, and she wasn't about to let the girl pay for another man's cowardice. It said I wasn't writing to accuse her. I was writing because I thought she needed to hear, one time, that I'd seen exactly what she was doing all those years. The little seeds, the keep yourself back, and that I'd stayed anyway. That the one thing she'd been wrong about, maybe the only thing, was the thing she'd built her whole strategy on. That I was the man who was never going to leave, and she'd spent 17 years teaching her daughter to treat me like I already had. It said the girl was 24 and didn't fully know who she was yet, because her mother had needed her not to get too attached to me, and she deserved the chance to sort that out now, as her own person. It said the shop was real and the van was real, and both belonged to Nora no matter what. And it said the mortgage on the house was paid up through the end of the year, which ought to give her time to figure out what she wanted to do. Nora sat down in that new van in the driveway sometime before dawn and did the arithmetic. 7 years old when I showed up. 17 years. The 6 a.m. drives on black ice. The 11 days after the storm. The metal in my toolbox she didn't even know I'd kept. And she remembered a thing. She was 12. And we'd been watching a Sens game on the Chesterfield, one of the rare nights she'd let me exist in the same room, without it feeling like a hostage situation, and at the second intermission I'd said something offhand about how I wasn't going anywhere. She'd thought I meant the game. Sitting in that van in the gray light, she understood, 12 years too late, that I had not been talking about the game. She went back inside and found her mother still at the table. She didn't yell. She's not built for yelling, that girl. She takes an argument apart the slow way, the way her grandmother took apart a recipe. She just sat down across from her mother and asked, quiet, why did you always do that? All those years, not getting too settled, keeping a bit of yourself back, why? Faye tried to hold. She's had a lot of practice holding. But the girl's going to be a businesswoman and a good one, and she knows how to wait a person out. Faye broke first. She told it not all at once, she'd need months to get the whole of it out, and even then she'd have to hand it over in pieces. But she told her enough. About Curtis. About Dale before Curtis. About building a wall around a 5-year-old's heart with her own 2 hands because she could not survive watching her daughter love a man and then watch him go. And how sure she'd been, for years and years, that I'd eventually be one more man going. Nora went very still. And then she asked the one question her mother couldn't get out from under. Did he know? All that time. Did Malcolm know what you were doing? Faye opened her mouth and closed it again, because the honest answer was yes. By the end I knew. I'd pieced it together the way you find the fault in a line, by listening long enough that the pattern finally shows itself. And I'd said nothing and done nothing about it, except keep showing up, because what in God's name was I going to do? Blow a hole in that girl's sense of who her mother was. Fight a scared woman for a child's affection like it was a thing you could win in a custody hearing? No, I did the only thing I've ever really known how to do. I called Gus, I found the van, I paid off the loans, I stayed. Faye couldn't find the words for any of that. So Nora got up and took the key and went back out to sit in the van until the sun came up over the river. Gus was the one who handed her the last piece, a few weeks on. She'd started the build out on the shop by then, and Gus came over one afternoon with a small framed photo and set it on her new counter next to the dough sheeter and said, "Malcolm dropped this off with me a long while back. Said to give it to you when the time was right. I figure this is about right." And he left, because Gus has always had good instincts about when to be gone. It was from the fall fair, the Renfrew fair, the year she was 10. She's mid-law on the tilt-a-whirl, hair everywhere, face wide open with the kind of joy a kid forgets they're even capable of once the world gets its hooks in. And off to the left, barely in the frame, not knowing anybody had a camera up, is me, watching her. With that thing on my face I never had a word for. Nora set it up on the shelf over the till, and Gus tells me it's never moved once. Through 2 years of that shop being open, through everything. Butter tarts and Nanaimo bars come and go off those racks all day long. The picture stays put. I was parked at the Petro-Canada out on the 17 when she called. I don't drive the lines anymore. I'm retired, but I still can't sit still, so I do a bit of driving for the food bank, deliveries, that kind of thing. I saw her name light up the phone, and I sat with it through one full ring. 2. Then I picked up. Neither one of us said anything for a bit. Then she said, "I think I owe you a coffee." I let the quiet breathe a second. Then I said, "I know a place. You're buying." And she laughed. And I want to tell you about that laugh, because it's the whole thing right there. It wasn't a polite laugh, and it wasn't only relief, though relief was in it. It was the laugh of somebody who's been carrying a heavy thing so long they've forgotten it's even heavy, and has just now, finally set it down, and the muscles that were holding it don't quite know what to do with themselves. For the first time in 17 years, that girl sounded free. We met at her own shop, after hours, Vera's in gold on the window, the blue van parked out front. She'd baked, of course she had. She doesn't know another way to say a hard thing. She didn't shake my hand. She hugged me, stiff, a little clumsy, her hands flat on my back like she was checking that I was actually standing there. We sat down with butter tarts and coffee, and we talked for 3 hours, and I'm not going to give you all of it, because some of it belongs to that table and nowhere else. But somewhere in there she looked at me and asked why I never once said anything, all those years, about what her mother was doing. I told her I'd thought about it plenty. "Then why didn't you?" "Because you never needed me to be right about it," I said. "You needed me in the driveway when the bus dropped you off. You needed the truck warm on a cold morning. Being right wouldn't have kept you warm." She looked down into her cup a long time. Then she said, quiet, like it cost her something, "You were there." And I said, "I was." Now, folks, because I know you're wondering, and because the last fella who told a story like this left it hanging and it drove everybody up the wall in the comments, let me tell you straight how it came out with my wife, because I owe you that. We didn't just paper over it. I moved out that summer, into a little place over on the other side of town, and for a good long while I thought that was the end of the marriage. And I made my peace with that too. But Faye, to her credit, and it took real credit, went and saw somebody. A counselor over in Pembroke, every week, for the better part of a year, digging up all of it, Dale and Curtis and her own mother, and the whole inheritance of fear she'd been handing down without ever meaning to. She did the actual work. She didn't ask me to come back while she was doing it, which is how I knew it was real. And not just a way of getting me back in the driveway. We're not fixed. I want to be honest with you about that, because the fairy tale version does nobody any good. 17 years of a certain kind of quiet doesn't wash out in a season. But we have supper together now, once a week, out at the diner on Raglan or over at my place, and there's an ease coming back into it that I didn't think we'd find again. She apologized properly, not the once-and-done kind, but the kind that keeps showing up. And I've come to understand something I couldn't see when I was standing in that hallway, just Malcolm. She wasn't a cruel woman. She was a frightened one, and fear you hold on to long enough turns into the very thing you were scared of in the first place. She was so terrified of losing another man that she manufactured a distance she couldn't close, and she held on to it until the one man who was never leaving finally walked out the door and drove to the river. Curtis, since I know you're wondering about him too. He went back to Oshawa about a week after the wedding, once the photographs were taken and the story of the proud father was safely told. He phones the girl maybe twice a year now. She's stopped waiting for the phone to ring. She learned the difference, finally, between the man who shows up for the graduation photo and the man who shows up at 6 in the morning in the freezing rain. And there's no unlearning a thing like that once you've seen it clear. I don't carry the bitterness. I hauled heavy things up poles for 30 years and my back will tell you all about it. And I've got no room left to haul something as useless as a grudge. Nora and I have a coffee every couple of weeks now, sometimes at her shop, sometimes she drags me somewhere new she's found and wants to show off. She picks up the check most times, working off what she calls the back taxes, and I let her, because it does her good and because the girl has excellent taste in butter tarts, which she came by honestly. She's expecting now, her and Devon, due in the spring. She asked me the other week, careful, not looking right at me, what I thought the baby ought to call me. I told her that was up to the baby. She said the baby was going to call me Grandpa, and that was the end of the discussion. And she said it in that flat, settled way she has, the same way she stared down the camera in the blue dress when she was 8, daring the world to argue. That photograph from the fair is still up over her till. I've got a copy of it myself, tucked up above the visor in the truck, where I can see it when I pull the sun down, heading east on a bright valley morning. A 10-year-old laughing on a ride she was too proud to admit she wanted to go on, and a man just outside the frame, watching her with a thing he didn't have a name for. I've got the name for it now. And some mornings, pulling out of the Petrocan before the town's awake with the river going silver alongside the 17, I think about a small serious girl who shook my hand like a bank manager and went straight down the hall without a word. And I'm glad, right to the bottom of me, that I stayed. I never needed her to call me anything. I never needed the medal or the toast or the walk down the aisle. The only thing if I ever wanted, the whole entire thing, was for that girl to look up one day and know that somebody had been standing there the whole time, in the cold, without being asked. And it didn't go that way for a long while. But it went that way in the end.